Shana Tova. And Michelle, right back at you. It's so good to look out from this bima again and to see so many friendly faces. I've missed you. I thank our Board of Trustees and my clergy colleagues for extending to me the invitation to speak with you on this holiest of nights. I'm honored to have this privilege. The adage that you can't come home again doesn't apply to me here. Temple Israel was and remains a home away from home for my family and me. Our sons were educated here, and now our 2 grandchildren are enrolled in our schools, L'Dor Vador. Since I became Rabbi Emeritus 6+ years ago already, so much has happened in each of our lives, in our families, in the life of this community, in our country, in Israel, in the Middle East, and around the world. And here we are again together at this annual reunion as we begin Yom Kippur and Temple Israel's 100th anniversary year. Tonight commences our day of fasting, reflection, self-criticism, and renewal, and is an opportunity to count our blessings too, to cherish each other, to remember those who have passed on, who have been dear to us, and those who built this community and left it to us as part of their legacy. Particularly in these soul-crushing and heartbreaking times in which we're trying to make moral sense in this new era that began on October 7th, 2 years ago. It's important to remind ourselves who we are and who we've been as Jews over our long history. Judaism includes many things: a moral and legal tradition upon the based upon the tradition, the principle of tikkun olam, repairing the world, a religion and faith, a culture, history, languages, a homeland, literature, art, and music. Though twice we were forcibly exiled from the land of Israel, we've kept the holy city of Jerusalem in our hearts. In exile, we've suffered persecutions, but we survived as Jews despite all those who sought to destroy us. Our liturgies, philosophies, theologies, and ideologies evolved as we lived and adapted in lands throughout the world. We are therefore not a religious and faith community alone. We're a people and civilization distinguished by our moral values, ideas, and sense of community, lived experience, and history, no less significant than the Greek, Roman, Ottoman, and British empires, though we've never occupied as much territory as any of them. I was asked tonight to speak to you about Israel, the war, Zionism, and our relationship as American Jews to the Jewish state. And I confess that after accepting the invitation, I asked myself how I ought to speak about this most horrific inflection moment in modern Jewish history and in the history of Israel. To start, the 20-point peace plan unveiled on Monday at the White House has good things in it, including an end to the war, the immediate return of the hostages, a plan for the day after in Gaza, the surrender of Hamas, a surge of humanitarian aid, no forced displacement of Palestinians from Gaza, an eventual Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, a recognition of the Palestinian aspiration of self-determination, and the developing of a credible pathway towards statehood, and the support of the Arab world, not a small thing. The proposal needs Hamas, of course, to support it, and we'll know soon enough if it does. Word is that it intends to reject it, but others say that it will accept it with modifications. But even if Hamas accepts the plan, it's likely that Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Hamas leadership will, for their own domestic political reasons, drag their feet and put obstacles in the way or even derail the initiative altogether. A significant weakness of the plan is that no Palestinians were involved in developing the agreement, and there was no mention of the future of the West Bank. For true peace and a two-state solution ever to emerge, Israelis and the Palestinians must work face-to-face from the ground up, not top-down, with one of the parties excluded, as Trump's plan does. After the press conference, Prime Minister Netanyahu, speaking in Hebrew, rejected Palestinian statehood, as he has done throughout his political career. I fear, therefore, that the status quo before Monday's announcement hasn't really changed, though I would love to be wrong. My initial intent in speaking with you tonight was not to talk policy, rather to reflect about who we are as Jews and what impact the Hamas attack on October 7, 2023, and these 2 years of war have had on our identity as liberal American Jews, and I say liberal with a small L, our Jewish values, and our relationship with the people and state of Israel. Since October 7th, like so many of you, I have continually felt despondent, outraged, grief-stricken, vengeful, and deeply worried about the families of those murdered on that day, the well-being of our hostages and young soldiers and their families, and about the thousands of innocent Gazans who have lost their loved ones, homes, and communities. I've been a Zionist since my earliest years. My family was among the earliest pioneers to Palestine, starting in 1880. And I have many dear Israeli friends. I've studied, taught, and written about Zionism, the state of Israel, and Jewish history, about Jewish texts, literature, and values. But nothing has pierced my heart and soul like what we have experienced during these past 2 years. Consequently, no sermon have I ever given that has been more difficult and painful for me to write than this one. The founding of the State of Israel only 3 years after the greatest tragedy ever to befall our people transformed who we were to become as Jews in this era. The new state returned us to our ancient homeland and to history. Israel gave us confidence and agency. It restored our pride as a people. It offered us protection from anti-Semitic hate and violence. And it became a laboratory in which our people's ethical tradition could be tested in the context of our attaining power and sovereignty for the first time in 2,000 years. But what happened on October 7th represented the greatest existential threat in most of our lifetimes to everything we have been as a people in the modern era. Israeli commanders feared in the initial days after the attack not only that Hamas would continue its savage rampage going north, killing Jews with the ultimate goal of destroying the Jewish state, but that Israel's enemies on all sides would join the war in a coordinated attack. Such a combined assault would have overwhelmed Israel's defensive capacity. Even before that awful day, Zionism and the state of Israel had come to be regarded by many in the United States and around the world cynically, with derision, and in the most pejorative terms. That downward trend intensified and metastasized almost immediately as Israel began fighting back. Those hostile to Israel have for years sought to reframe Israel's narrative as discriminatory, racist, colonialist, and as a cancerous foreign element in the heart of the Islamic Middle East that had no legitimate right to exist. An increasing number of progressive left-wing Americans, people many of us thought were our friends and social justice allies, agreed openly with the harshest Israel critics, justifying morally what Hamas did, and some even celebrating Hamas by calling its brutal and savage terrorists inexplicably freedom fighters. Every people has the right of self-definition, and we liberal American Jews and Zionists who support and love the state of Israel have that right as well. Especially now, after 2 years of war, a dramatic rise in anti-Semitism around the world, and Israel being labeled a pariah nation, we Jews cannot allow Israel haters, anti-Semites, and right-wing extremist Jews to define us or to determine the inner life of the Jewish people. We need to be able to restate our liberal Jewish narrative and lead with it whenever we discuss with those who know much or little about the history of the Jewish people, Judaism, Zionism, and the state of Israel. I want to express tonight to you, as clearly as I can, from the deepest place in my being, in an effort to reclaim our narrative, why I remain a liberal American Jew, a liberal Zionist, and a supporter of the people and state of Israel, despite my very strong protest against the policies of the most extremist, anti-democratic, right-wing, messianic, and myopic ruling coalition government in the history of the Jewish state. As a liberal American Jew, I believe in the right of the Jewish people to a state of our own in our historic homeland, and in the right of Israel militarily to defend itself whenever it's attacked by terrorists and hostile states set on its destruction. As a liberal American Jew, I affirm that the universal humanitarian values advocated by the ancient prophets of Israel, developed by rabbinic tradition over the past 2 millennia, and included in Israel's Declaration of Independence, including equality, justice, compassion, empathy, human rights, and peace, all foundational virtues in Judaism, must be the core values guiding all of the Israel government's policies and reforms, its military and civil society. As an American Jew, I acknowledge that I am not an Israeli citizen. I do not pay Israeli taxes, nor do I send my children and grandchildren to the Israeli military, nor do many of us American Jews know people who were murdered on October 7th, though 2 of the young people killed at the Supernova Music Festival, Norel and Roya Manzouri, Alehem Shalom, grew up here in our Briskin Elementary School. Few American Jews have family members who were taken as hostages, and few among us have been subjected to missile attacks, forcing us to run quickly with our children and babies in our arms into shelters with only seconds to spare before the explosions and the walls of our homes shake. Only Israeli citizens have the right to take the hard decisions that impact their lives and well-being. However, as an American Jew who loves Israel and who cares deeply about Israel's citizens and future, I insist that I do have the right to share my ideas and criticism of Israeli government policies and trends that I believe are harmful to Israel as a Jewish and democratic state, that threaten our security and well-being as diaspora Jews and are contrary to our liberal Jewish and democratic values. I had little doubt that Israel had to respond militarily in order to dramatically reduce Hamas as a military threat to enable Israelis safely to return to their homes in southern Israel, just as Israel had to defang Hezbollah in Lebanon to allow Israelis to return safely to their homes in the north. However, I've been haunted ever since I read words written soon after the war began by a dear Israeli friend who wrote, quote, "After October 7th, I understood the anger and desire for revenge, but I feared Hamas would win the battle for our souls if they succeeded in making us as murderous and vengeful as they are." Close quote. I knew Hamas couldn't win this war on the battlefield. Thankfully, Israel is too strong and strategic a military power. But like my friend, I worried too that Hamas would succeed in corrupting the heart and soul of the Jewish people. This war began as a just war of self-defense against a cruel and vicious enemy that committed massive war crimes against our people. Israel's initial war goals were to bring the hostages home and to degrade Hamas's ability ever to attack Israel again as it did on that day. Like many Israelis and American Jews, I too have felt the need for revenge. But I've asked myself, at what cost to my heart and soul and to the soul of the Jewish people should I or any of us continue to harbor such self-destructive emotions? And at what moral cost to our people have these 2 years of violence and killing had upon Israelis and the Jewish people around the world? Earlier this year, 600 retired Israeli security, military, and intelligence officials wrote to President Trump to urge him to apply pressure on Israel to end the war because they believe that Hamas was no longer a military or strategic threat to Israel and that there was nothing more to be gained in continuing the battle, that the war was harming Israel's international legitimacy, causing immense suffering for Gazan civilians, and that the war was no longer a just war. But despite their advice and expertise, the fighting has gone on and on. Though Trump has now tried to end this war, over the past 2 years, Israeli bombers, missiles, and tanks have utterly destroyed Gaza, house after house, apartment building after apartment building. Water, electricity, and sewage infrastructure no longer exist. It's estimated that 90% of all homes, 436,000 residences, are either destroyed or damaged beyond repair, with tens of thousands of innocent Palestinian civilians dead. Men, women, children, babies, the elderly, entire families wiped from the face of the earth. They and so many of our own Israeli soldiers and hostages that have been killed could have been saved had the war ended long ago. If all this isn't awful enough, from March to May of this year, the Israeli government withheld all humanitarian aid from Gaza, allegedly to force Hamas to release the hostages and to surrender. But that tactic backfired. We've seen the images of starving children. Even if Hamas doctored some of the photographs for its corrupt propaganda purposes, is there really any doubt that thousands of children were starving because Israel used humanitarian aid as a weapon of war? This tactic was not only immoral and un-Jewish, but according to international law, a war crime. After heavy criticism from the United States, Israel opened the gates and aid began flowing again in hundreds of trucks daily into Gaza. But far more is needed to address the horrific long-term effects of famine. It is American policy that Israel and all recipients of the United States weapons must adhere by law to standards concerning humanitarian aid and the use of force. As painful as it is for me to say this, because I have always supported American military aid to Israel throughout my life. I support those 27 Democratic Party senators who in July voted to block the sale of U.S.-made heavy bombs, guidance kits for bombs, and assault rifles to stem Israel's use of these offensive weapons to harm civilians, block humanitarian aid, and contribute to mass starvation in Gaza. Though the bill didn't pass in the Senate and wasn't expected to pass, the intent of those senators was to put maximum pressure on President Trump, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and his extremist government to end the war. Those 27 senators are friends of Israel. In their vote to withhold offensive weapons, they carefully distinguished between those weapons and the defensive weapon systems of Iron Dome, Arrow, and David's Sling that save Israeli lives. These senators should not be accused of being anti-Israel, as some in the American Jewish community have done. They are not that. They instead should be praised for acting on behalf of the best interests of Israel and the Palestinian civilians of Gaza, and for applying necessary pressure on the Israeli government to do what is just and compassionate. Many of us are aware also of the organized right-wing extremist settler violence and murder of Palestinian civilians in the West Bank, the demolition and burning of their homes, orchards, and fields with impunity, and often with the participation of uniformed Israeli soldiers. The intent of these violent settlers, with the backing of the extremist Israeli government, is to drive Palestinians out of the West Bank altogether, from their homes and villages in which they have lived for generations, to make way for more Jewish settlements and the eventual annexation of the West Bank into a greater Israel, also contrary to international law. Several weeks ago, I was stunned, perhaps some of you were as well, when Prime Minister Netanyahu arrogantly boasted that Israel will become Super Sparta, a reference to the ancient hyper-militaristic, self-reliant society that was isolated from the rest of the world. The Super Sparta vision prizes armed force prowess above all else and is not a vision for Israel's future that most of us would recognize, or of what early Zionists hoped for Israel to become as a nation among nations. It's a roadmap to deepen Israel's pariah status around the world, and to accelerate Israel's moral and political decline. It ought to be clear by now that given the massive destruction and killing that continues day after day, including today, even after the White House meeting on Monday, that Israel has crossed red lines and committed war crimes. War crimes are committed in every war by every side of the war. And in this war, it's likely that rogue commanders and rogue soldiers have shot civilians without provocation, and missiles and bombs have destroyed buildings inhabited by Hamas commanders without nearly enough concern for the number of civilians who would certainly be killed. Those commanders and soldiers should be held accountable when the war is over. We Jews know better. Our own people have been the victims of war crimes throughout our history. Judaism gave the world a system of justice and a moral tradition of compassion based upon the principle that every human being is created b'tselem Elohim, in the divine image, and therefore of infinite value and worth. Israeli soldiers have long been trained in what's called tohar haneshek, purity of arms, meaning that every means and every effort must be taken at all times by every commander and every soldier to preserve innocent human life. To their great moral credit, hundreds of Israeli reserve soldiers are now refusing to report for military duty because they know that Israel is now fighting a cruel and unjust war. The vast majority of Israelis, too, according to polls, are demanding that the war, killing, and suffering end, and the remaining hostages be returned home. The war has shaken Israelis and world Jewry to our core. The wounds of each of our peoples, of Israel and Palestine, are going to be difficult to heal or overcome for generations. In the United States and around the world, we Jews are also dealing with a rise of anti-Semitism, much of it exacerbated by the war that most Jews alive today have never seen, experienced, or imagined before. The Palestinian-Israeli struggle is amongst the oldest unresolved conflicts in the world. The Israeli historian and writer Fania Oz Salzberger put it exactly right when she wrote a month ago, quote, "Here's a truth to reckon with. Neither Israelis nor Palestinians are going to disappear anytime soon. No one can destroy their respective claims to a sovereign state in their ancestral homeland, which happens to be the same land. Barring a cataclysmic event, there will be no river to sea Palestine and no greater Israel. This is a conflict that can only be solved by territorial and political compromise," close quote. There are serious ideas, in addition to what we heard on Monday, that have been developed over the last number of years between Palestinians and Israelis working together from the bottom up, who recognize and accept each other's legitimate national aspirations, needs, and rights. Despite whatever despondency I have felt, there are two related ideas that I actually find hopeful and visionary. One is called Eretz L'Kulam, a land for all, 2 states, 1 homeland, a political vision developed by Israeli Jews and Israeli Palestinian Arab citizens. The proponents of the idea envision 2 democratic and sovereign states alongside each other, Israel and Palestine, linked together in a confederation much the way the European Union functions. The second idea is a 23-state solution that includes all the Western Arab states and Israel in coalition with each other, complete recognition of Israel for the first time in Israel's history by most of the Arab and Muslim world, and the creation of a demilitarized Palestinian state, perhaps as part of the confederal model. This isn't the time or place to discuss the details of these ideas, but it's important to know that there are creative and pragmatic ideas that can offer hope and a way forward. After the holidays, this sermon will be posted on our synagogue's website and on my personal blog, and I will include links to both of these proposals that spell out the details if you're interested. All ideas about how to resolve this conflict are, of course, not risk-free, but the status quo is unsustainable. Violent, rejectionist Jewish Israelis and violent, rejectionist Palestinian Arabs will have to be controlled harshly by each state's respective police forces in any future negotiated agreement. To be Jewish, especially in these times, means in part to lift ourselves up out of the morass of confusion and despair, to reclaim our virtue as critical and creative thinkers who raise moral questions and seek practical solutions, and who can argue with one another without withdrawing from the fight or being intimidated by Israeli zealots or their supporters in the United States who slander us as self-hating Jews, anti-Semites, capos, and traitors, because we dare to be critical of Israeli policies and actions as a matter of conscience and moral outrage about the war that long ago should have ended. We Jews have always viewed our purpose through an aspirational lens. We've striven as a people to be better than we are, that we do not ever settle for the status quo, and that we stay committed to correct moral wrongs and move forward as best we can. Some of our own young, liberal, and progressive American Jews, however, are decoupling the state of Israel from their Jewish identity, and others are closing the door behind them and disavowing being Jewish altogether. Many are walking away from the American Jewish community because they believe that we rabbis and teachers, Jewish leaders of synagogues, national Jewish organizations, and Jewish summer camps who taught them Judaism's moral principles, emphasizing compassion and empathy, justice, human rights, and peace, are, in their minds, hypocrites because we have not been nearly critical enough or critical at all of Israel's bad behavior in this never-ending war. I want to speak now to you, our young generation of Jews. I understand how many of you feel and why you feel as you do, but I believe that this is not the time to turn your backs on our people, on Judaism, on liberal Zionism, or on the state of Israel. Our Jewish moral and ethical principles transcend any specific point in time or series of events. Judaism is not what we see in war or as a consequence of our having to cope with anti-Semitism, though both can teach us much about ourselves. Judaism is what we rabbis, teachers, synagogues, and Jewish summer camps try to impart to you, young people, about the vitality in living an enriched Jewish life, about the multitude of ways to be spiritual beings within Jewish community, about the wisdom our sages, mystics, and great thinkers have left for us, about ways to live the rhythms of our holiday and life cycles, and about the meaning of the establishment of the State of Israel as the greatest single accomplishment of the Jewish people in 2,000 years. Though many of you may wish to turn away, I hope that you will decide to stay engaged in whatever way is meaningful to you, because we need you, your way of thinking, and your critical moral voice. Another thing about us Jews, our struggles are nothing new. We are, after all, Yisrael, a people who wrestles with God and with the moral challenges and complexities we face every day as individuals and as a people. We Jews have always recognized the wide chasm between what is and what ought to be. The best of us, however, have not sat on the sidelines, nor given up without entering the fight on behalf of our people and for human rights, justice, and peace for all peoples and nations, including the Palestinians. We live in a violent and corrupt world. It's understandable that so many of us want to turn away from the news out of the Middle East and throw up our hands and shout enough already. But once we do that, and we've had a chance to breathe and restore our moral and emotional equilibrium, it's better for us to draw close to one another again and reaffirm our Jewish identity, our age-old principles and values, and our faith that eventually there will be a better day for Israelis and the Palestinians. I keep reminding myself that history swings like a pendulum, from the death of the spirit to renewed life, from division to unity, from war to peace, from despair to hope, and that we Jews have lived this swinging back and forth over and over throughout our history. I remind myself that every human-made problem has a human solution. If we apply critical and creative thinking, our understanding of the needs and truths of the other, and the will to compromise in order to solve the seemingly unsolvable. Excuse me. As a Jewish community, Each of us has the right to think what we want and to feel what we feel, as I have shared with you my thoughts and feelings here tonight. And the Jewish community ought to be a safe space for everybody to find their place and their voice, to argue with one another passionately but respectfully, to disagree without becoming disagreeable, and where even our harshly contrasting ideas and perspectives, our many different life experiences, and our generational distinctions can live alongside each other with humility as we engage in discussion and argument and criticism and self-criticism. Our people's safety valve is that we talk and argue and discuss, and hopefully that we also listen to each other, especially to those with whom we disagree the most. Our challenge as American Jews in these days is to find ways to come together and to affirm our foundational Jewish values as we struggle to cope in these painful and disturbing times, and not to become numb to the barrage of terrible events that are all around us. And it's our challenge as well to look to the future with fortitude and hope. Our history of survival as a people teaches us to do so. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks wrote, quote, "To be a Jew is to be an agent of hope in a world serially threatened by despair. No Jew knowing Jewish history can be an optimist, but no Jew worthy of the name abandons hope," close quote. This new era in Jewish history begins with a darkly written chapter, but this is not the last chapter. It's upon us, all of us, to write what comes next. I wish us all the strength, perseverance, thoughtfulness, and moral courage necessary in this new year. I often sign off my emails to my Israeli friends saying, "Stay safe and sane. With love, John." And I say to you too, my beloved congregation, stay safe, sane, and strong, and most importantly, hold those whom you cherish very close. We need each other. With love, John. Gamar Chatima Tova.